We're going to start the meeting on time today. I'm uber proud of myself. We're going to go in here. It is 2:30 p.m. on this 11th of January, 2018. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Still kind of in that New Year phase, right? Still feeling good. Every time I've had to write the date, I have successfully written the right year. Very proud of myself thus far. So first up is roll call. Start with Ms. Walsh. Present. Ms. Petco. Present. Mr. Van Hope. Present. Mr. Hanson.
Here.
Ms. Sharp. Present.
Here.
Yes. I am present. We do have quorum. I don't know if we have any excused absences today, but Craig is not here to make my announcement. It makes me so sad, but I guess, would you like to do it, Jenny?
I'll do it. AMATS committee meetings are open to the public, and the public is provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. Business items are done by staff or consultants. After the committee discusses the business item, the public is invited to form a comment.
Thank you. Let the record show that Ms. Buck did join us. That's all right. We actually got started directly on time this meeting. All right, moving right along. First item is approval of the agenda.
And just one change to give Craig a little bit more time to get here, because he's going to try to get here around 3. Can we do the info item first? The info items first. For the business item. Craig wanted to be here to talk about the tip.
So we had a work session on, okay.
Yeah.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So move to move the informational items ahead of the business items.
Item 6.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Are there any opposed to approving the agenda with modifications? Hearing none, the agenda is approved with those changes. So the first item ahead in front of us, we do have meeting minutes from December 7th, 2017 meeting. Let the record show that Mr. Young also joined us. So we're looking at the minutes, and we adjusted the agenda slightly. Nicely encapsulated all of our friendly amendments. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Moved by Mr. Lansing, seconded by Ms. Buck. Are there any opposed? No, but I should abstain since I wasn't here. Shouldn't I have property? I remember that word.
Craig says.
You don't have to on minutes.
Never mind.
All right. Hearing no objections, those minutes are approved. Okay, so the first item before us then is going to be the first informational item, the draft completion.
The month, so please take your time to look it over. We'll be bringing it to you next month for an approval, hopefully. So we have the policy here, just to give you some background, again, on the policy. It's been a long time coming. We had a resolution go forward many months ago through the policy committee, start work on the resolution, which we did, finally get started on that, and I apologize for the delay. We just had a lot of other projects going, but we finally have a policy to put forward here. So this is the policy. It's about 6 pages. Just to give you some background, we do have a policy advisory committee that helped us draft this Complete Streets policy. We wanted to make sure that we included all the agencies, all the transportation agencies in the development of this policy to hopefully, as well as we could, get everyone's buy-in and make sure it's a policy that worked for most agencies. Just to reiterate, this will be an AMATS specific policy. It won't be a municipal policy or a DOT policy. They'll have the option to adopt a version, this one, or a version of their own if they so choose. This is an AMATS specific policy, so just to make that clear. On our advisory committee, and I printed out the folks that were involved in helping us draft this. So we have folks from AMATS staff, we had some folks from traffic, long-range planning, mode and transit, mode planning, Hal Hart from Director of Mode Planning, Tammany, Office of Economic and Community Development, Department of Health and Human Services, State of Alaska Department of Health and Human Services, and then we had from DOT. So we feel like we hopefully did a good job in vetting the various agencies. Our process was to start with some case studies of best Complete Streets policy. So we took the National Complete Streets Coalition Best Complete Streets Policies of 2016 and looked at all of those, and then I put forward a bunch of different drafts for folks to look at. We also looked at Fairbanks's Complete Streets policy and used that as sort of a baseline to start from. And so using those, we drafted the one that's before you. It's got 9 different sections. And just wanted to point out some of the sections that you may want to take a look at in the next month or so before it comes back. Some things that we tried to make sure that we hit were just making the point, and this is more a point to the public than to you all, but just making sure that people know that we're not prescribing one street type for all of our streets. We know that there are many different street types that require different applications of design to make them safe. And so the 4th bullet on section 5, that's on page 3, I just want to read out, AMATS does not subscribe to one singular design for streets. Each street is different in function and context. Roadways that are planned and designed using the Complete Streets approach may include a wide variety of transportation solutions. So that just is a point out, and then I wanted to also include this little handout, and I made this presentation to the pack and to the policy, included these photos. Just to show you that there are many different types of complete streets, and then they can include all kinds of different streets, so they don't all have to have all the bells and whistles. Some of them do, like this small town on Main Street, and has like all the bells and whistles, but this rural lane here, which is one of my favorite examples, is also an example of a complete street. It doesn't have anything special, but the way it's made and designed is very comfortable for pedestrians and facility. So just something for you to look at and think about. And then I just want to point out one more thing, which we just found out about yesterday, and that is the Green Roads program. We were working with DOT to try and incorporate that into the policy. And I think because of some Green Roads things that they're doing with their program that make it hard to share how they do the process with the public, I think DOT is going to be adopting a different strategy. So we're going to be probably taking that out of the policy, so just so you know that they'll be coming up with some language that works for them and take that in instead. So, again, you have a month to send us your ideas. If you've got comments or changes, we're still making them. So please feel free to send us your thoughts, and are there any questions?
Mr. gonna have,
Are there currently any references to green streets in this?
yes.
Green roads.
I'm sorry.
There are, yeah, I'm sorry. So on page 4, and on page 5, the last two bullets, top of page 4, there are 2 references to green roads. Last 2 bullets, top of page 4, and then on page 5, on section 9, the second to last bullet has a green roads mentioned.
Also page 5, a bullet. I'm sorry, a bullet in section 9.
Okay.
At the bottom of there.
Yes, I'm sorry, second to last, yep.
There is at the top, very, very top of page 5 as well.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So are you anticipating making
Bless you.
changes? Are you anticipating making changes to this?
Yeah, so what I was gonna, just hunt that back to Robert and Jim Amundson and see what kind of language they wanted to put in there or switch it out with, and then we'll just switch it with whatever they want. Yeah.
So if your intent is to bring this to us next month, our meeting next month is February 8th, and then really things have to be posted on the website in advance by February 1st. So if we could, I mean, I'm just trying to give you a little bit of time to accommodate. So ideally, it'd be nice to have our comments, I was gonna say by like Friday, January 26th.
Okay, great.
So I guess for committee members that are here, if you have any major changes or want to get comments addressed, it'd be nice to have them to staff by Friday, January 26th. So that doesn't have time to incorporate them into what's posted on the website. Public review.
Thank you.
Let the record show that Ms. Hassan has joined us. Are there any other questions or comments on the complete streets policy?
Second question that I hope is not too stupid, but on context sensitivity, has the state adopted their own definitions already?
You mean a context-sensitive solution?
Yeah, just wondering if has the state adopted any policy formally on that? This would conflict. Don't know.
I do not know. I don't
Okay.
know.
So if you see that they have,
Yeah,
then let
yes.
us know.
Madam Chair? I don't know about currently, but I can tell you several years ago when I was working on the policy, the agreement policy between DOT and the municipality, that context sensitive solutions were just, kind of being introduced and all that.
Right.
And I had a lot of time over at DOT talking with them about it. It was, at that time, the policy was that that the requirements that they have to go through for any, federally funded project, they have to go through a whole, you guys have a whole book about how to do it. What's the term for that?
Design standards.
Well, yeah, but no, not that. There's a procedure that you go through when you're scoping a project using federal funds. And then that was considered to consider all the elements, the context sensitive solutions included, and so they felt that they were meeting it in that way. That was then. I don't know if they've gotten formal with it yet.
Yes, I have had discussions earlier with Jim Evans. He said that the current standards that we use to develop federal highway projects meets the intent of complete streets.
Okay.
That's my understanding as well, is that when you have to go through the NEPA process, environmental, all the documentation that you have to go through an evaluation and public meetings and that I can leave. I'm trying to remember whether you guys have adopted a specific CSS policy or if you have something that states that you're meeting the CSS with that.
Yeah, we're just meeting through the NEPA,
Okay, yeah.
environmental clearances first.
Because we're working on we have our own CSS, so. Yes.
Any other questions or comments?
Are there any questions or comments from the public on the complete streets policy? No? All right. Once again, just a reminder for committee that we can get our comments So next before us would be the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. Do we have?
And I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, the expert.
Aaron O'Gillen with DOT MPF. I'm filling in because Craig's on here and Vivian's out sick. So super fun time. And Lori's here to back me up in case I get something wrong or miss it. So the MTP is moving forward slowly. We're looking at projects right now to organize them into the different alternatives and getting that into a MetroQuest survey to get out to the public. So they can start looking at the different alternatives based on projects that were scored and from the charrette. So it's a lot. Before the charrette, we had 280 projects that we looked at, so the charrette added a significant number of projects to that. So it seems like it's taken a long time because it is. It's a lot of stuff to go through, and we're trying to be diligent in it.
How
So
many projects are we now?
I don't know at this point. I know it's over 300. So, and so we have a couple alternatives we'll look at, and that'll be explained more in the MetroQuest survey. Hint, if you want to look at that before or while the MetroQuest survey is going out, please let us know and we can get it to you so you can see it before it comes to you at a TAC meeting, asking you if it's okay to move forward with it and model it. So what's going to happen is we'll have the MetroQuest survey out for 30 days. And then once that's done, we'll compile a comment response summary, however we do that, and then bring it to you guys to show you kind of not finished project, but our product, but the draft after the comments from the public. We'll ask you to look at it and then provide your recommendation to move forward to model it, and then we'll go to the policy committee and ask them for approval to go ahead and model it. So if you would like that, just let us know and we'll get it to you while the MetroQuest survey is out.
So do we have any, you guys know about when you're shooting for? Do you have that?
We'd like it to be out by early February so we can take advantage of the transportation fair to let people know about its availability and encourage people to provide comments there.
That would be a good opportunity. Be great.
So that's all I have.
Are there other questions? Comments? So, I'm just making sure that I'm following the process. So you're working through the projects right now, right? You had 280 already, there were more added from the charrette, an additional comment. You're working through the project list, and then the MetroQuest survey is going to ask, it's asking the public, I guess, what alternatives, which.
So we're organizing them into a couple of different alternatives, and we're going to put that information out as part of the MetroQuest survey. Please understand, and I caution this for everyone, the MetroQuest survey is limited in size and detail that you can do, but there'll be external links that people can go and see the whole list of projects.
Yeah.
And so we'll put that out for people, for the public to review and provide their comments, you know, hey, why is this project here? Maybe it should be over here. Maybe it should be bold. You know, this is what we'd like to see. You're missing a project, that kind of stuff. That's what we want to hear from the public and you guys.
Got it. And then when it comes to us, we'll have to make the decision as to what alternatives and what different scenarios we actually want to move forward to modeling.
Correct.
Yes, right now the intention is to have kind of our baseline scenario and then 2 build scenarios.
Okay. Just trying to get myself set up, prepared for what's going to be coming.
Yeah,
Making sure
just so
we're
you know,
It'll be
it's going to be a
exciting.
lot.
Yeah.
It's going to be pretty extensive, so.
work sessions, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I'm going to recommend that when Craig gets back that we try and schedule a work session after you guys have had enough time, and with the policy committee. Always hard because they're weeks apart, so getting the information to the policy committee in time so they have enough time to comment and keep us on schedule. So we'll try and work on something and have a work session together or individually, depending what you guys want, and kind of listen to what your comments are before we bring it to you.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll do it before the day of the TAC meeting, because it's a real pain for staff.
Any other questions from the committee?
Just one, in terms of the modeling itself, sorry if you can help me understand, have we exercised the 2 options, the 2 additional options, or have we done it's
Right now, we've just done the deficiencies analysis using the existing plus committed network, which is projects that have construction funding 2018 or earlier. So we don't have anything at this point except kind of it's not really the base, but it kind of is the base. I'm sorry, it's really confusing. But we start with that, and then we add the projects into it and kind of get what version we want the network to look like
So
based on the
the
different.
baseline that you have are the projects that are in the tip right now.
Tip and step, yes.
For 2018.
2018, yeah. We looked for anything in the stip that we had a lot of certainty on, that they would move forward. Of course, changes happens with projects funding being removed, so we'll have to go back and look at that in light of a couple of, one project in particular that had its funding removed, and then kind of see what we need to do about that.
And then in terms of the assumptions for the bridge, not for the bridge, for the highway, not for the highway, which portion of that is the baseline right now?
Well, the bridge is not in anything because we were told to not included in anything. So, but we are looking at the Seward Highway to Glen Highway connection, if that's what you're referring to. It's being looked at as an option for either scenario. We're not sure yet. That's why we're kind of still looking at it and making our recommendations based on what we've heard.
It sounds like, I mean, the MetroQuest survey, the follow-up, the information, we are going to have the opportunity to determine what those scenarios look like. That's what I was asking about.
Yeah. Yeah, staff's kind of taking its first stab based on public comment we heard, and we've heard a lot of positive comment about the Seward Highway to Glen Highway connection, for example. And so we're taking stuff we've heard from the charrette online, the first MetroQuest survey we did, everything that we've heard to date, and incorporating that into the alternatives that we are kind of putting together.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Are there any questions or comments from the public on this item? Thank you, Erin.
So we moved pretty quickly.
And then to the items. He's coming. He landed like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, I know, he's got time.
Yeah.
I don't want to hold us up, though. I'm sure we're
Yeah.
going to have some discussion, so we can go ahead and get started. So we now have our action item, action 5A, which is the continuation of the draft 2019 to 2022 transportation improvement criteria with Mr. Wilson's edits.
Since I haven't been super involved in this tip process, I'm going to turn it
Okay.
over to Erin, the expert.
So again, Aaron with the T. There we go. All right. I didn't have too many of these. So I'm handing you, is it the? Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'm handing you a comparison we did. You don't have to work. Okay. So you guys saw the draft text criteria in December. You guys made a motion on it. It went to the policy committee. Did the day of the policy committee, some edits were given. And so the motion was tabled until the TAC could look at the edits and provide their recommendation. And we're here if anyone wants. So what I just handed you was a comparison. We had a work session in January to kind of go over the edits and see what do they mean, how do they impact the scores, etc. At that meeting, we had a couple of different comparisons of the scores based on the TAC's recommended criteria, and then utilizing the edits that were given at the policy committee. They were really confusing, and you guys asked for an updated version. So what you have before you is that updated version. I actually need a copy. So there's a couple different columns that we added in here. The first column is the 2015 to 2018 criteria. So that's the currently adopted one that we use for the 2015 to 2018 tip. Second column is the 2019 to 2022 TAC recommended criteria rank. So that's using the criteria that you guys recommended for approval to the policy committee. Then there's Mr. Weddleton's edits in there, so you can kind of see how they compare. And we also have the scores, so you can see how they kind of go back and forth. Overall, you can see there's not too much of a difference between the TAC recommended ones and the ones from Mr. Weddleton. So there were some additional edits that were made to Mr. Weddleton's that we worked with him on based on the work session, and I can go over what the overall edits that he has are. The first big item is removing the weighting from the roadway criteria. So making all of the criterion equal in weighting except for safety and pavement. Safety is max 10 points, preservation is 9 points max. Everything after that is 7 points max. So they're all the same possible points for all the rest of the criteria. So that's the big first one. And you see those edits in front of you on the small sheet here.
Sorry, you went through that kind of quickly. What was
Yeah.
the max?
Where are you?
It's on this small sheet here.
I know, you said that in food safety was a max 10 points.
Yes.
And for the rest of the how much?
9. And everything else is set. So that's the big one, first big one. Next one is a removal of 2 of the criterion. It's functional classification and ITX. So what you see before you are the edits that have those criterion removed. So the big comparison have those criterion already removed. So you can kind of see what it looks like without. And then there were some smaller edits that were recommended for some additional changes to the definitions, just adding some additional language. And you can see that on the small sheet provided to you guys. I don't really know what else to say. Most everyone was at the work session. I don't know if you want me to state my opinion on staff level of the edits, or just stand here and have you guys ask me questions if you have it.
I guess the first question I have is how are we going to swallow this watermelon? Well, there are several edits through this in its entirety. Some of them are big, some of them are small. And are we going to sit here and debate each one of them one by one, or are we going to take this thing as a whole? And how do you want to do this?
It's up to the committee.
Well, then, I will move, for the sake of discussion at least, this entire, you want to comment, do your public comment then, because I always forget that.
I say before you make a motion, we have to have public comment. So don't make a motion yet.
I will reserve that guidance from.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the committee?
What was the second classification, or you said functional classification was dropped? And then
And ITS.
ITS.
Transportation assistant.
For the question I have, for the sake of the folks that are on this meeting today that weren't at the work session, I think it'd be important for Aaron to explain the consequences of accepting these changes or not.
Okay. I did talk with Craig about this, so it's something that we both agree on and the rest of the AMATS staff agree on. So these changes, the deletion and the removal of the weighting, are significant enough that our recommendation would be to put it back out for the public to see. We've put it out there for the public, they've provided comments on it, and you're making a pretty big change to the roadway criteria. So if you accept the deletion and the removal of the weighting, we would recommend you put it out for another 30 days. So that adds about 2 to 3 months to the schedule for the TIP approval. And the reason for that is getting the comments from the public, synthesizing the comments, getting comment responses, bringing it back to you, bringing it back to the policy committee. So it adds a lot of time. And so what that does is it pushes out when the TIP is approved. And so we're looking at January of 2019 by the time we receive final FHWA approval, which that's basically assuming nothing else goes wrong from here until then. And assuming no squishing of meetings or anything like that. It's just keeping with your guys' standard TAC and policy committee meetings. So what does that mean for the TIP overall? Well, what that means is you guys enter in a grace period if you don't get your TIP approved by September of 2018. That's the end of the current fiscal year, FY18. So what that means is you are unable to start any new projects or any new phases of projects because you're limited to what's currently in your approved TIP, which would be the 2015 to 2018, and that ends at the end of 2018. So for example, you can't start a new pavement project. You can't move forward with a pavement project that you kind of have ready to go, potentially. It's up to really FHWA, so we have to talk to them about that. But big things are, it delays non-motorized projects starting, and we've had significant issues with getting those designed and constructed in a reasonable time frame because they take a long time. For example, the non-motorized projects that we have in the TIP currently for the implementation have taken about a year for design, and then there's right-of-way thrown in there. So, picture it, if you delay the TIP approval until January of 2019, you're already 4 months into FY19, which is 4 months less to get things designed and ready to go. Now, that doesn't sound too bad until you think about it. If it takes a year to get a project designed, you're now 4 months into 2020, and you're now 4 less months to get everything done with right-of-way and get to construction. So you have additional delay, which means it's harder to get projects from design to construction in a timely manner. And it also is potential that if you don't have a project ready to go to absorb that funding that's kind of sitting there after a project delays, AMATS will lose that funding. Because what it is AMATS has a year to obligate their funds. If you do not obligate your funds in that federal fiscal year, that funding goes back to the state to obligate. And if the state can't obligate it in time, then it goes back to the feds, who then redistribute it to other states to utilize. Yeah.
2 questions. First, correct me if I'm wrong, we're already looking at it being into FY19, 2 months on their current schedule, correct? So we're really only looking 2 months.
Yeah.
Secondly, I recognize that there's like wholesale changes, like just deleting of stuff, and then there's tinkering of stuff. Can you provide some sort of guidance as to what level of tinkering with stuff is the threshold for going back out for public comment versus taking everything en masse?
So there's nothing written or set in stone saying if you make this amount of change to the criteria, you have to go back out for public comment. So it really comes what is doing best for the public.
Agreed.
So it's up to you guys and the policy committee to determine what that threshold is. In general, making small changes to, okay, instead of a max of X number of points for this one, we want a little less, or we want a little more. Those are small enough changes that it's still within the realm of what the public saw. But doing things like completely removing weighting, for example, that gets into a little gray area, because now it kind of reshifts what the criteria looks like, and you no longer have, say, supportive project or ITS on kind of the bottom of the scale. They're now all equal past the first 2. And so it's a big shift in kind of what is important for AMATS to be focusing on. And I think it's important to get that back out to the public to see what they think of it. Because some people may want EJ, environmental justice, above support of a project or above something else. And definitely a deletion, I think, is the extreme side of the scale of having to go back out to the public.
I was hoping the Assembly member might be able to speak to the philosophy behind the desire for these changes.
We did more.
I apologize.
I'm happy to do that. You want me waiting? You want to, so are you a public comment time and it would be fine?
Not technically, he's asking.
Yeah, whatever, it'd be fine, sure. So I talked about it at the other meeting, but, I think a couple issues. I think Brian had a pretty good metaphor. How do we swallow this grape? It's really quite small. I mean, these changes are very incremental. I read the public comments, and I believe these respond to the public comments certainly as much as the changes that were made by staff. They made changes. We had public comments. There were 28 from 7 individuals. Traffic calming was 4. Along quieter streets in the neighborhoods. Neighborhood quality of life, 3 comments. Environmental justice, 2 comments. Safety, 2 comments. Staff responded and changed some of the weights in those categories, and I thought it was good. I was glad to see some response there. And that's largely what I did. I just reweighted some. So I read those comments, I responded to comments, and I said, let me see. It's not just those comments, though. We all live in this world, and we understand the system because we use it, we talk to people. My public process is, I knocked on 3,000 doors when I was campaigning, and I learned a lot about what was important to people. Daily, I get calls from people, and we get a lot of emails that are like boilerplate emails, but calls from people, frantic calls, is about speeding in my neighborhood. People are driving too fast. I understand because the highway is not connected. Speeding in my neighborhood, well, we know it is because we're doing the grid. Every quarter mile, you're dumping more traffic into the neighborhoods. We get going 60-something miles an hour on O'Malley Road, and I turn on the neighborhood street, and I slow her right down to 40. I'm going too fast, but I felt like I slowed down a lot. So there's collateral damage, I call it. So there's a lot going on in this, and so this public process that we did for this was fine. I know it's hard to get people to comment, but my changes are not opposed to that at all. So I don't think we need to go out to public comment. Now, say 2 categories were dropped. Okay, what were they? Well, ITS. It was very puzzling that that is a category. I mean, why not include concrete as a category? It's a tool for achieving these other goals. So ITS is still in there. When you evaluate projects, cost benefit is one. And if you can achieve a goal by adding a lane on the Seward Highway, or just using some kind of, stoplight metering into the traffic flow or whatever, I don't know what the technical term, but there's a lot of technology things you can use instead. That makes it more efficient economically. So ITS is still in there when you rate your projects. To have it in its own category is puzzling. Cindy said that was valuable because sometimes you have ties, and that was useful to break the ties. Well, there's lots of ways to break ties that make more sense. Than using, saying what tool do we use to build this. The breaking out of the functional classification, getting rid of that, well, that's not really gone. That is still rated extremely high because in our MTP, we double count it. We count how much traffic is on a road, and if it's got a lot, it's weighted high. And we count functional classification in the MTP as well. And those track very closely together. They're not identical, but they track very closely. So in the kind of the fuzzy logic of scoring, I believe it's a double count. So to get in that MTP 2040, which is a main criteria to get into the tip, you've already double counted capacity. Now, I did learn since doing this that it is not a total, other projects can be added that wouldn't include that. But I think broadly speaking, most of the projects are already rated based on their capacity. So it's not really that is taken out. I just don't want to count it a third time, but I believe you already overcounted. So I see this as swallowing a small rate, perhaps a raisin. When I put it forward, it's very incremental. So I'm very surprised to say back out to public comment. I think it's just as responsive to public comment as the changes that staff did. It's a little bit different. And we see what is the end result. It's not dramatic. They just did a little sample of projects, which I really appreciate. I know this has been a huge amount of work for staff, and Aaron was very patient with me because I would forget things, and we had some frantic things, so I did really tremendous work with them. But I don't think it needs to go out to public comment again. It is responsive to public comment. And I think it is swallowing a raisin because we can see from Aaron's work here in the little sample, it didn't make a huge change.
Madam Chair, follow-up question for Aaron. What would be the possibility of some sort of a compromise, or what is the law, some sort of compromise? Because it's only extended a year as opposed to a 4-year period. What do we lose?
It doesn't matter. Doing an amendment to the tip, a major amendment to the tip, is still about a year-long process. So you're still going to be in the same conundrum, and then you'll have to start over and already be behind in the next iteration of the tip.
So you talked about how the meetings are staying the same. Is there some way to truncate any portion of this? I mean, are there critical paths? I mean, are all of them critical paths? Or can some portion of it be condensed so that if it is extended a year, we can somehow make up for the rest and have a sort of a holistic process that goes through the public process to re-comment on the reprioritization?
I mean, it's all a critical path because you're putting federal funds on the line by not getting it approved in time. I'm assuming there can be a shortening of the schedule if you guys did back-to-back meetings with things, but you have to realize that you still have to get things posted for you guys to review and approve. We still have to do 30-day public comment periods, which is required in our public participation plan. We still have the assembly to go through. I'm still not sure if that includes us having to go through PZC because I can't really get a clear answer.
My apologies. What I meant was extending the tip by a year under the existing criteria, which was the prior criteria prior to the introduction of this, and then doing a 4-year tip based on a revised criteria. It would seem to me it would give us the opportunity to be able to meet the funding timeline because you're not changing the criteria, you're just foreseeably approving it.
Yeah, but you're still having to take about a year to get that extension done because it's a major amendment to the tip, which still takes about a year to do. And then you're backward, a year from now, you're in the same spot. You have been working so diligently to try and get that year done, that extra year added for no gain.
And there is no increment in between 1 and 4. So it's really 4.
Yeah. That's why we talked about this last time when it was brought up and recommended not doing an extra year to the tip because it's the same thing. You might as well do a brand new tip at that point because you have the same amount of time, excluding any delays for new criteria. I mean, sorry.
Jerry, you had a comment?
I think he asked my question in a different way.
Okay. Mr. Hart?
Yeah, let's examine the time frame again. Based on what I heard staff say, the time frame, if we went back out, didn't include strategies of doubling up meetings or having this meeting adjacent to the decision maker meeting. So there would be ways to, can you comment on what ways, if we did go that route, would you be looking at to save time?
So I don't actually know how much time it can save, but you can do like your guys' meeting, the TAC, finish with what you're doing here, post it immediately after for the public and get yourself the time frame to have the policy committee next week. But that's not really fair to staff because we don't have enough time to be able to edit what you guys comment on if you have any edits and get a position. So we do maybe Friday, give us a little bit of time. So then we have the policy committee a week later and have them do it. But no offense, but everyone in this room was very busy and it's been nearly impossible for Craig and I to get even a work session between the two committees set up. So to sit there and expect that we're going to get these brand new meetings where everyone has to readjust their schedule is harder for us because it has been proven to not happen in the past. Like for example, the work session we were supposed to have at the end of December, but no one was available, so we had to push it out to January, which kind of caused delays. So I don't know how to answer that because I don't know I don't know at this point what it would look like. I can make a rough guess of, okay, you start reducing it down, but you're still going to have problems because you're dependent upon the assembly calendar. We have to do an assembly work session, assembly introduction, and then assembly approval. Like I said, I don't know, so I have to go to PZC, which has its own extended length of time. So without knowing if I can get that pushed through faster, we just kind of go based on what has been happening normally, and it's about a year, barring any major delays.
I guess I'm a little troubled that we have a schedule that already shows us 2 years late, or 2 months late with those contingencies. I mean, my recollection last time we went through this is it did take us a little while to get through the assembly, and I'm not sure what PZZ is going to add. So do we have some sort of sensitivity analysis to the schedule as far as how much that may set us back? The assembly will be at least 2 weeks to a month if it goes well.
We had a work session a couple of months ahead of time for the assembly, and then we had 2 separate months. The first one to introduce it and the second one. So it's 2.5 months for the assembly. So not to be rude when I say this, but if we had followed the schedule we had planned out, we would be on schedule right now. So the edits that came up with the policy committee have caused significant delays if they have to go back out to the public. That's really where the delay happens.
And the PZZ,
Like I said, I really think that we made changes to our operating agreement and the policy and the PPP that removed the PZC requirement from the TIP and only made it the MTP because it's an element of the comp plan. Right. The thing I'm not sure of is if the assembly requires something from PZC saying what is their action on it. There's an assembly member here. So if that's not the case, because it's not required in our PPP, then we don't have to go to PZC, but we still have the assembly time schedule that we have to adhere to.
Correct. Okay.
Was it going to BCC because they were, at that time, our public?
yeah.
The Citizens Advisory Committee.
Yeah, they were-
And that was changed when we made the actual Citizens Advisory Committee, so now we have to just include them. But like I said, the MTP is an element of the comp plan, so it still has to go to PZC before the assembly.
Got it. But this does not.
It does not.
I have a
Mr.
question.
Hart?
Assuming the point that was brought up, that we had 28 comments, this is responding to the 28 comments, there's still a process ahead of us at the assembly, is that correct? Where they would listen to the changes there and the public would have an opportunity to weigh in at that point. Is that right?
I mean, yes, but you've already done the criteria at that point. You've already scored the projects and put them into the tip. So their comments on the criteria would be harder to deal with at that point unless you start completely over. If they want to make comments on the projects, that's perfect time for them because that's when it's there. But the criteria is already kind of come and gone at that point. So the 3 months we had the criteria kind of out for the month, the 30 days we had, and then kind of the 3-month whole thing of reviewing the criteria was really everyone's opportunity to provide their comments and keep the schedule going.
Can I
It's here.
back onto your, please? So, when we're talking about things going as planned, Craig, welcome. Things going as planned. For example, so Hal was just asking the question about, okay, we go to the assembly. Generally, at that time, you're going to actually have the projects ranked at that time. They've gone through, you've done the criteria, you have the project listing. They get to play and decide if they want to change rankings, add projects, do whatever, modify at that time. If at that time, the decision was made that some of the criteria needed to be tweaked, that's significant and would really, really set things back if it happened at that time as compared to even now.
Yeah, the AMATS would have to make the decision whether to tweak the criteria at that point and basically spend another year getting the tip done, or delay those tweaks until the next time you look at the criteria and incorporate them in. Which, my comment from DOT staff, this is not an AMATS position, these edits seem like they need more. They don't seem really finished, like there's more waiting to be said and to be done. And it seems like they're more appropriate for the next time we update the criteria because we're behind. And just so you know, that can happen as soon as the tip is approved. So a year from now, you can start editing the criteria for the next go round. And you could even use them to help put in new projects if needed, I think. Craig, please correct me if I'm misspeaking on that, but that's up to AMATS to do if they want. So just because the criteria is approved now doesn't mean that you're never going to get a chance again to update it. It's just remember, if you're trying to update the criteria in the current update of the tip, it's going to be problematic once you reach a certain point. And at the assembly, it's probably a really bad point.
So if the criteria were modified, the next time it would take effect is what, 2022?
I mean, if you didn't make any updates to the projects in the tip at that time, it would be 2023 and beyond. Because the new tip we're looking at is 2019 to 2022.
So is there any feasibility, hypothetically, is there any feasibility that TIP gets approved without these changes with some sort of a sunset clause that says that here is a term limit for modification of the criteria to take effect prior to 2023?
The tip is required to be updated every 4 years. You could update it 2 years from now if you wanted to. But we have to do it at least every 4 years. So we could do this now and restart the clock and then start right away working on these criteria with a really large change, and in 2 years adopt a new tip. We could do that.
Yes.
How practical is that, though?
Well, we haven't done it before, but it's not insurmountable. I mean, I understand there are some significant changes that some people want to have happen, but the time crunch is the challenge here. But
It would help remove the possibility of losing federal funding if you did that. Because you could get the tip going and start things that we know are needed, and then when you update the next one, you can readjust as needed.
the only thing that's comparable that we did before is the tip used to have a 3-year cycle. And so at one point, we added a 4th year, and we kind of tweaked them a little bit at that point. Before, it was a 3-year ready to go.
Still in it?
So I'm looking at 1 through 7. Is there a reason why we do 1 through 7, not 1 through 10, or 1 through 12, or 1 through 3? Is 7 the magic number because there are only 7, or is 7 the magic number because that's all the ones we're going to get done before 2023?
I didn't have any time to do more than 7.
Or you didn't have any time to do more than 7?
This was the very last minute, and I almost didn't get this
Well,
done.
the next question I have is, so if we're dealing with 2019 to 2023, are all 7 of these going to get funded in that time period?
Well, so
Realistically.
these are looking at projects that are currently in the TIP, so
But these are rankings, so I'm assuming that the order of whatever we would start attacking them on is 1 through 7.
The big thing to think about is you also have grandfather projects that you have to think about. So those are projects that are currently underway.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if those are large enough and suck up enough of your funding, it could limit starting projects. And so it pushes out the ability to start. So I can't say that guaranteed we will get these, this top 7 will be guaranteed funding in the 4 years.
Look at the list. Spinardo Hillcrest to Benson is underway, very close to done. Spinardo Corridor Plan is underway. Minnesota Drive Study, can't remember if that was in that section.
It's done.
Yeah, it's done. And so,
Well, I guess where I'm going with this, and it's a philosophical question, where I think the councilman's brought up some very good points, and it's at the end of the day, 1, 2, and 3 become 3, 1, and 2. So for the sake of ranking, they're effectively the same, and then 4, 5, 6, and 7 are identical. And so I see us spending a lot of time and a lot of headache and stuff and angst over this, when regardless of which way we go, it really doesn't feel like, other than whether we did it right or did it more or less kind of sort of right, it matters. And I'm having a hard time with that.
I would concur with that statement. I think, John, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're kind of pointing that there's not a huge change in these tweaks that you're making here. And if there's really not much to be gained by the change, but we put at risk you're going to give me back that 26 minutes, let's put it that way, right? I'm going to spend it how I want to spend it. Is that really the cost benefit or the risk worth that additional change to the points?
Well, no. What I did here is, I'm totally blown away that this would have to go back through a public process. I mean, it's such a small change. And I knew that. I didn't see the ranking, which they did, which was tremendous. I thought this was a very simple thing. I should have shown it to the PC 3 days before instead of day up, but I got stuck in both. This is really small. I'm shocked that we're talking about 3-month public process. But I would not hold up the project. So, you can decide today, go with John's or don't. I think the real decision is, does it need a public process or not? If the answer is no, make your decision. If it's yes, then make a recommendation to the PC. But I would not hold up this project and destroy the world for this incremental change. And in fact, my starting point is substantially different. What I'm looking at now, I should have just gone long. But I think reasonable. So I've looked at this and looked at other communities. They start with community goals, very clear community goals. You don't have ITS in there. You have, we need more affordable housing, we need it downtown. What are we doing to direct traffic and help traffic there? All those goals, and our new land use plan outlines it very well. This MTP 2040 technical thing we saw starts that way quite well. Let's start with that and then figure out how we can get some points. And that's where we really, really need to be. And, so whatever you do with this, I'm starting on that. Much more time than
I don't think the minor tweaks are, I'm concerned about that, but actual elimination of criteria that have already been through a process. I think that's where I hung up on having to go back through a process.
So I understand that, the hang up. And like I said, ITS is implicitly in those, and also the functional classification, but that's my decision. So you guys can decide. I'm not going to be crushed either way. I think I have a minor change that's a minor improvement. But we can go for it, and I will start working on different kinds of changes soon. And I will be more inclusive with everybody, and I won't drop it on the table at the last minute. I'll give at least a day notice.
So one of the comments, one of the things that I considered is, I know timeline and staff not having the opportunity to go back and re-rank all projects. When you're only looking at 7 projects though, and not looking at the entire list, is there could be some surprises. There could be projects that were further down the list, that when you start looking further and further, that looking at both our new criteria, the ones that we recommended last month to move forward, and Mr. Willison's new criteria, that score significantly different than what they scored under previous criteria.
Sure.
Things could shift and move, and when you have like a small sampling size, that doesn't tell you the entire story per se. So when I'm looking at this, I have a very dichotomous view of this. I've been thinking about this a lot, because part of me thinks, yes, the points points are very minimal. So when you're looking, how do you define significant, you know, when you're looking at points? But then, I also don't feel that the removal of a sign is that significant at times. But I can tell you, in public perception, sometimes the removal of a sign is very significant. And so it is a perception thing, and when these went out for public comment and we went through them, and if we make any additional changes, especially with removal of them, even if they are minor in point value to me, when it comes to the points, it's still a significant change. And not allowing the public an opportunity to comment, the bigger concern I would have is, let's say somebody gets a bee in their bonnet and is really upset and decides to call FHWA or whoever and say they changed the criteria without going it back out for public comment. Then what risk do we run not following our accepted public participation plan? And my experience coming to the dark side of government from the private side is that the process is there for a reason. And unfortunately, it is bureaucracy, and there are parts of it that unfortunately I have had to come to grips with, even though I don't always agree with it. And there's definitely sometimes much more efficient ways. So, any other questions or comments before we open it to public comment?
So, Madam Chair, I'm not sure how to sort of go about this. I mean, I have reservations in the process itself. For example, I relate to sort of the notion of what are we trying to be as a community? What are we trying to be as a city? And how does that relate to the way that we fund the very projects in the context of who we are trying to be? And I'm not entirely sure that the way that the ratings have been is sort of complementary to what we are trying to be as a community. So the prospect of changing this, whether incrementally or wholesale, is to me, it's a very exciting prospect. To wait 4 years to revisit this again, it's too long. Of this table alone, who's going to be here in 4 years? I figure everyone sort of can calculate that, right? And so what happens 4 years from, who knows, right? The here and now, we're here right now, and we're having this conversation. And every time we have this conversation, the thing that I love about bureaucracy is it's always a time crunch. It's never enough time. You can't do enough, but we're here. So, no, I suppose we shouldn't jeopardize funding for the sake of formality to make incremental changes, but at the same time, something feels inherently wrong about sitting here as individuals who have the capacity for change and not changing anything, right? So what can we do? And I don't know how to introduce this, but what can we do to set some sort of a clause that says that if we move forward with the requirements as they were, funding will not be jeopardized, but at the same time, we're going to set a limit for ourselves, our own resources, that says that within the next 12 months, or at least no later than the next 24 months, we will revisit this issue on a wholesale basis and implement something. And maybe the tip doesn't wait 4 years, maybe it waits 2 years, but reattune ourselves to listen to, again, I don't go and collect 3,000 votes to get myself nominated, right? But certainly we've got an individual who's done that. So I think we should do something to sort of limit what we're doing in terms of revisiting this issue and reassessing the criteria to make it in sync with the principles that we're looking to advocate for this community as a whole. I realize there's a disparity or a dichotomy to that view, especially in Anchorage and Alaska as a whole. But to not do this would be a grave disservice.
At the work session, I made the comment that in my 6.5 years at the city, every time we move through the process of updating any criteria, whether it's MTP, whether it's TIP, whether it's CIP, we always have the discussion that, you know, this needs to be tweaked further and we need to work on it sooner. And it always seems to be that it doesn't happen until, once again, timeline, last minute, because we're all very busy, limited resources, and it doesn't happen ahead of time again. I think, I guess I'm speaking opinion, and this is a question for Craig maybe, of whether or not, I guess we as a committee can make the recommendation that we feel we should be working on revising this criteria prior to the next update of the tip, so that we can look at possibly modifying and updating and doing it in less than a 4-year cycle.
You can make any recommendation you want, and I think that's a fine one.
Well, let me add in, what this current criteria that we're using, without modifications, was reviewed, was tweaked periodically. I mean, it's not like this is 15 years old or anything. I mean, it's reviewed and tweaked periodically, every time you renew it.
Or do I have to wait for public?
Are you making it as public or as staff?
Can I make it as staff?
Sure.
I just want to say that I think that in the work session here too, and talking with staff, I don't feel like anyone has a problem with the changes that Mr. Weddleton is suggesting. I feel like, again, it's a process issue, and as someone who represents the non-motorized projects, which are at most at risk if we delay, if we have to go through public process and then we're delayed. I definitely am sensitive to that and would hope that we don't put those projects at risk for something that's not going to make a huge difference in how things are ranked. And I also agree that I think removing an entire criteria is a big deal. And I think that definitely, because if someone removed neighborhood quality of life, I think people would get all up in arms in that, and then that would be crazy if you didn't take that up for public review. So as a staff recommendation, I feel like that's a big deal. And just the other thing about the non-motorized, I just don't want to see projects get unfunded. We're already at risk for that, and that's a huge deal for my people that I represent. That's all.
So one of the conversations, once again, at the work session was, there's no such thing as reality, there's only perception. And that, those folks in the room, we may look at it and think that these changes may not be that significant. But generally, people that are okay with something that is just presented to them don't make comments. So we had 28 comments, about specific things making it, but that's not to be said that removing certain criteria, that there wouldn't be folks in the public that would then say, hey, why are you removing that? It is something we need to be considering, and there would be further comment on that. So that is a part of the process. So kind of the things, we haven't opened it for public comment yet, but when I was in the work session, I made notes for myself about the recommendation that we were going to have to make to the PC. We have lots of things ahead of us. We can choose whether we want to accept Mr. Weddleton's changes. We can choose that we want to discard his changes. We can choose if we want to accept some of the changes, but not all of the changes. And then we also have to make the call on whether or not we feel they either do or do not have to be released to the public, and make those recommendations to the policy committee. So we have a number of decisions in front of us as far as this recommendation goes. And the question comes down to whether or not we want to include something in that to recommend updating if we decide this time to not accept this criteria, if we want to then make a recommendation that we work on modifying this criteria prior to the next update. If we wanted to include that as part of the motion. So there's a lot to digest. We're just gonna say that, there's a lot to digest right now. So Jerry, did you have anything else?
I was just going to say that I agree with Mr. Hassan's idea there, that, the only question I had is he kept saying the current criteria, but, we've already gone through a process.
Yes.
So it would not be, we wouldn't be wanting to forward the current criteria, but probably
What we recommended last
what we
time.
recommended. And then look at within a year, whatever time limit we put on it, or recommend to the PC, and say that we think it should be reviewed and given a good going over at that time prior to
To
that.
see if it's consistent with their adopted comprehensive plan. So, Mr. Hart, you also.
Yeah, like 3 or 4 comments. I too agree with Mr. Hassan. But I also am fearful of putting too much burden on staff, because I know how hard Aaron works, I know how hard this team works, and they do work very hard. That being said, let's be clear. Planning is a kind of a layered thing, and I heard it described earlier as a cake, and there's different layers to that cake, and we're trying to make sure that we get that right. And so the land use component is we've had a lot of information. We took an extra long amount of time to get that information. What's at stake is on the development side. I think this year we're probably pushing 400 million worth of permitted value. This isn't, this is kind of a static, low year. What's coming is even larger, we hope. And what is coming is a different kind of development on some key intersections. You saw in the paper the other day that they're going to do something downtown, and that's going to push our height and bulk, and it's going to change the relationship between the buildings and which the roads serve land, right? So we want to fully develop that land and move our economy forward. That's what the big plan is infill, get that investment going, but to do it in such a way that those sidewalks are also ignited, that we're paying attention to the different modes where we're doing that. So that's the big vision, is to bring these together. And I think I would be okay if we got this whole team spending that time to all be on that same page, because you really need to be on that same page to make sure that the private sector development is doing what we want it to do, both with our streets, with our parking, and both on state routes and local routes. So it might be time well spent to get the whole team focused over the next 12 months, 24 months. But I don't want to kill the staff in the process, so.
Well, because they're also working on
Why?
the MTP update. That's nothing. Mr. Bishop?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments as well, and I'll first start by saying I think that most of the comments here have been talking about removing two, well, I'll just call it insignificant criteria, and they may be insignificant as stated. I agree with your comments that may have repercussions on other projects that we're not seeing here. However, what I would like to talk about, and I think removing the weighting on all projects is a much more significant change than removing or tweaking any of the other criteria. And although I recognize that as a significant change, specifically after the public involvement period, I also will say that during some of the working groups that we had, the weighting, kind of going along with Mr. Son, Mr. Weatherly, the weighting was a very confusing topic for a lot of the folks. And we spent a lot of time discussing how the weighting would be applied and how, we changed the criteria and we changed the format of it to try and address some of those concerns. So on one hand, I see any changes we make as being significant enough to have to go out to public review and comment again, which would obviously change all the schedules and everything we talked about. But I also can understand the need to revisit this and look at that for future needs.
Any other questions or comments? I do have to open this for public comment still, and we have no motions ahead of us, obviously. No? All right, are there any questions or comments from the public on this item at this time? Yeah, I asked a favor. Can we turn the lights on? So you have the people in the back. Sure. I think that's okay. Thank you, Brian. Hello. Yes. Yes. Would you please state your name for the record?
Hi, I'm Cheryl Richardson, and I've followed these issues for a number of years now. I've watched the TIP criteria for 2 decades. Frankly, they've been tweaked but not significantly changed in that time. I think AMATS has had a real difficult period trying to adjust and bring itself to reconciliation with Anchorage 2020. It was adopted, 18 years ago now. And now I feel that finally that day is coming where the groundswell is rising enough, our neighborhoods are being heard. And we want our transportation dollars to be spent in service of our community. I live in Anchorage South Edition. We're going through a neighborhood plan, and we did a little general exercise, but we had 100 people come into our meeting at the church, which is a lot of folks for our neighborhood to show up at one meeting. And we did the, what do you like about your neighborhood and what are your concerns? The primary concern was traffic and noise. And these are longtime South Edition residents, but we're talking about the major arterials, AC, INL. You all are very familiar with Fairview's heartburn over the suffering they do from gambling. Just want to share that with you as a neighborhood priority. I believe there are other sections out there. When we did polling as Anchorage Citizens Coalition, for years, people said that traffic was their worst concern. There was a police officer who used to go to community councils in the old days, Cindy Stanton. She said the primary concern she heard back at community council level was cut through and speeding traffic. Again, I feel that AMATS can do a better job responding to our community plan. And what folks want is quality of life and also environmental justice. We recognize that some people, if you can afford multiple cars, it's easier to get downtown. And so what these amendments you're looking at do basically doesn't change the priorities you're dealing with. When I ran the numbers, I didn't see that any projects were going to be changed. And it does just incrementally shift what people have been asking for. And frankly, even they asked for it in your comments that you received. So few people responded to the public process. It wasn't the most effective public process I've seen. But 4 people said they want less traffic in the neighborhoods, and that response didn't get, those comments did not get any response. That they were simply brought, well, that's not our job to reduce traffic in the neighborhoods. So that's a continuing problem. I'll be brief. These changes are incremental. Do what you will. But it is time to start shifting AMATS to be more responsive to our community values. These criteria today are the same I've seen for decades. They're tweaked, but they're the same. And there's very little public participation at this point because people are so discouraged that this agency can respond positively to community needs and the growth of our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Are there any other public comments? Hearing none, the matter lies to committee. We have a motion.
I don't quite know how to make the motion, but try to sort of encapsulate what it is in summary, but a motion in which we move forward with the prior criteria, which has already been approved.
Well, no, we recommended it for.
We already recommended. Previously recommended, back to the policy committee, with the caveat that in the essence of time and in the essence of preservation of funding, that the policy committee moves forward with the approval of that prior recommendation. However, with the secondary caveat that states that AMATS and the TAC specifically would impose upon itself a 12-month, no later than 18-month timeframe or a deadline to revisit and revise the TIP criteria. And then this is where I suppose other members may want to sort of add things on. For me personally, it would be good to get to a point to sync the MTP 2040 project pipeline into the TIP that would be upcoming. given the heartburn over the rankings that seems to be going on.
I don't know about heartburn, but I'm going to second the motion.
Okay.
So those are, I'm sorry, so those are two separate motions?
Is that all one motion or?
Or is it all one motion?
I think it's all one motion.
So recommend the policy committee approve as
Previously
previously
recommended,
submitted.
and then also
And then 18
with that,
Within 18 months.
Within 18.
within 12 to 18 months, revisit the criteria in its entirety. So I guess the question.
With the intent of foreseeably adopting a new tip.
Because I kind of see them as two separate motions.
I think it could be one.
Madam Chair, it might be easier for the policy committee to just give, this is our recommendation on criteria. Yes, and then we can do a separate action. We can impose the other stuff on ourselves, the policy committee can.
Right, yeah, I don't think we need the policy committee's approval to revisit the
Right.
criteria 12 months or 18 months or 2 years from now.
It sends a
That's
more
something.
clear message to policy committee, let's stick with.
Yeah.
But I think we, yeah, I think we
We
need
already
to let
have.
them know that's the intent.
We should let them know the intent, because the last thing, as the chair mentioned, you'd want is to get to the assembly and they have questions and this isn't in there, and it gets rejected.
Okay. So the question is to whether or not there's you did make it all as one motion. So, and it was seconded, so we're in discussion right now with whether or not there wants to be friendly amendment to break it apart. Can we do that? I guess this question process.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Frank, second motion to break it apart, you were saying?
Yeah, can we do amendments since that was kind of
Do
made?
amendments.
Okay, well, I say, because that was kind of made all as one motion, like a friendly amendment to break it, to say that we recommend forwarding approval of the previous.
Yeah, just make it a general main
So-
motion and then do your amendments to it.
Wouldn't the first thing to be, you got two things, the recommendation to the policy committee to stick with the criteria that was already put forward, and the second thing is a resolution that this committee will, will revise the criteria. So actually are separate things. Yes,
Not revise, review and incorporate them.
yeah, but I'm just saying that recommendation policy committee on the one piece of it, and then just make a resolution. That's just really a standalone thing, but you obviously can inform the policy committee that make a resolution, act it, whatever. Are you making a friendly amendment? Well, no, to modify the original motion. Yeah, I'm making a friendly amendment that the original motion be limited to recommendation of the policy committee to stick with the previously advanced criteria. And let's make that amendment, and then let's take up a separate, I'm suggesting that we take the other up separately, so we take this off of the first motion.
The intent is the same, so I can second that.
Yeah.
You're okay, original motion, okay. Is there any other discussion? Are there any opposed to the original motion as amended?
Because this is in recognition of the policy committee's concern that the criteria could have been better developed earlier. So that's what we're trying to convey.
Yes.
Olive branch.
Do I need to? Yes, ma'am.
Chair, Ms. Chair.
Yes.
You were just asking if anyone's opposed to the main motion as amended?
Yes.
Are there any more amendments to that motion?
That's true.
Sorry.
Good point. Exactly. Before, yeah.
Could you guys repeat your final before you vote?
The final motion as amended would just be at this time to move forward with our previous recommendation with the criteria that was modified. 2015-18 was updated to 2019-2022 that we recommended for approval last month. And then that's it. Okay, so now we are looking at, that motion has been made, we have made our recommendation, but now we have a separate resolution.
Well,
Mr. Hassan, would you like to
resolve that.
resolve?
The second resolution, to visit the TIP criteria in a wholesale approach, or in some, within a 12-month period, not to extend and not to exceed 18 months, which would look upon the criteria in the context of how Anchorage municipality and associated partners are seeking to design the city by focusing on density, infill, transportation. Anything else anybody else would like to add? That's the general intent, because
And you originally said with the intent of actually updating.
yes, updating the TIP to, Craig, I don't know what the next appropriate time frame would be, if not a 4-year period.
I would assume once you have some criteria, that's, you just be it where we're at right now. It's-
Yeah, I say.
Here it is, and then you go through the rest of the process.
Mr. Young,
Sorry to get a stick in the mud, but can we extend it past 12 months? Because a year from now, we're going to be kind of in the middle of a really important process with the MTP, and staff's going to be pretty consumed with that.
Say 12 to 18.
Yeah, but he said starting at 12, but we're not going to start at 12, so it's kind of, can we start at maybe more than 12?
So in the back of my mind, I suppose, I guess what I was thinking was maybe there is some benefit to be had, maybe there is some sort of a relationship between the MTP 2040 and the TIP, such that you could leverage the recommendations off of the MTP 2040 and intertwine them to the intent of what we're trying to accomplish with the TIP.
So the 2040 MTP is supposed to be done by November of 2019. So a year from now, we'll be in big public comment period time, which is very stressful for staff.
Agreed, but do you not feel that there are synergies to be had between the two processes such that the ranking criteria in here should have some sort of symbiosis to the ranking criteria already established in the MTP 2040?
I think you're always chasing the process, no matter what. You know, we have an interim MTP, which is really recent, and those were tweaked. You know, in 2 years, we'll have a new one, but it's just kind of like with the MTP when we were talking about which socioeconomic assumptions we're gonna use. We were using ones that were a little older, we have newer ones, but they were kind of different, and we were just constantly chasing it. So, you know, it's a good time, but it's also a bad time. So, you know,
I mean,
staff will do whatever you guys want us to do.
Sorry, my intent
Figure it
was
out.
not revisit it. It's just waiting a couple of more months until we're out of kind of that frantic hair on fire period, when we're closer to getting the MTP finally approved, and then we can actually have staff devote a good amount of time to helping everyone kind of start working on the criteria. I don't want it to be in another situation than we are now, where staff is so busy with other stuff, they don't have the time to devote wholesale to the TIP criteria.
Wasn't this to be completed by, his motion to be completed by 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, the intent was to like start
Not
now
start at
and be
12
done
months,
within
right.
12 to 18 months.
Start it now and be done in 12 to 18 months?
I believe that was the intent.
Okay,
So-
that's not what I heard from the resolution. I heard start 12 months from now
No.
and start up, because, okay.
No, that wasn't, I don't think that was the intent, was it?
I don't know if that makes you feel any better, but no, the intent was to start it now.
Yeah.
That makes it worse.
So,
Because staff is not going to have any time to be able to devote. And you guys have already done the UPWP, so you've said what staff is spending its time on and is not the TIP. So we'd have to do an amendment to the UPWP to get staff to take it from other projects that will suffer to put towards this.
So you're saying you don't have the resources to accomplish what we're talking about accomplishing?
And starting now and getting done in 12 months?
That's
No,
fine.
but if you start 12 months, or I would recommend maybe like 16 months from now or something.
So 16 months from now, you would begin to have available resources to revisit the criteria.
Yeah, I mean, what I would recommend is you also look at what the upcoming UPWP that you guys are going to have to approve, the budget, and incorporate it in there. Because then you can actually take staff time and put it towards this item, because it's not budgeted for that. So now we're going to have to start focusing. If we start now, we're going to have to say, okay, what projects are not going to move forward to accommodate this?
So
the story of my municipal life, there are never enough resources.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's true for everyone. So if I may pose this another way, is there something that could be done to allocate additional resources?
Yeah, waiting until the 19 UPWP, which is starting in October of this year, because then you can say, okay, our main concern is the TIP criteria. So we don't start any of the other projects and we instead put more funding towards that. Because you're kind of starting a new UPWP right now. So my recommendation, sorry to be bold, but is, get the UPWP for 2019 focused on doing the TIP criteria. Because then you can say, okay, we're not starting this, we're putting all the resources towards the TIP criteria. And then once that's done, a year from now, you can start working on it, okay, let's get this going, but expect that we're going to be in the middle of getting the MTP approved, so maybe a couple of months we'll be just kind of starting to review and getting, surveys done or something. Not really a wholesale hit the ground running and go until the MTP is closer to being completed.
We wouldn't want, just, I guess, speaking with the amount of, as Aaron was saying, at that point in the MTP, we're going to want the community engaged and focused on what the MTP is doing at that time.
Yes.
And what the recommendations and results and reports of the MTP. And if we tried to throw the TIP criteria in at the same time, that is kind of demanding a lot of the public as well at the same time. Really, when we're trying to have them focus on multiple things, because we are trying to, really heavily engage on the MTP and finalize that. So I kind of get kind of the slow build up and making sure that we're not. I agree with Bull in the sense of staff. I feel like I'm always fighting the beast with 1,000 arms, sort of thing. But there's only so much I can ask of the public all the time, because then I don't want to have them miss an opportunity. So it's kind of a concern. I agree. That's first.
I guess my feeling is we just need to put an ending on it. It's like, is it 18 months? Whenever you start it, I guess I don't care as long as it gets done. And I don't want to say, this is 4 years from now, 3 years from now. I guarantee I'm not going to be here. Well, I shouldn't say here. But, and Bull's right, a lot of us won't be around, so I just think it needs to have a date that's certain that we're going to get it. Whether we say 18 months, 2 years is the absolute end. And I kind of like the 18 months, I guess.
Mr. Fennell?
Yeah, to comment on that, and with what Aaron said, I think it's important. He did say something that's extremely important, which is UPW. And if we, coming this fall, eliminate all the other projects or request additional money, but we dedicate in the UPWP desire to have this done, that is kind of the start of the process. And that's how you get it started, say, yes, we're going to spend money and do this, and that starts it. However long it takes is however long it takes. And we can work on that after we get the money to do it. But
Technically, that UPWP only is for a year.
The budget's for 1 year.
The budget's for 1 year, so, and it runs, yeah, I know, October, so that's calendar year.
But you guys have to start working in October. All right, there's another thing I forgot. We're working on the TIP at the same time as well. So having us update the criteria while we're in the middle of the MTP and the TIP is a lot to be asking in the next year. We're trying to get the TIP for the grace period, so adding the criteria on top of that, it's awkward also. Like, hey, we're updating the criteria, but it's not for this one, it's for the next time we update. It's a little weird.
Mr. Hart?
Yeah, if this, I understand that what we can give to this to make it happen with existing resources is time. But if we need to make a friendly amendment, that we need the necessary resources to do this addition, then let's make that let's be so bold as to say that with this, if we need additional resources to accomplish the task within a time frame, let's do that. I had a goodbye lunch for people that are being laid off today. So, sometimes it is resources that are needed to accomplish the task. Engineers get that. So if we need to do that to take the city forward, let's make that recommendation.
So the question I'm lost now. Where we
Can I
are.
make a suggestion?
Yes.
Okay, we've got the one motion that's going to the policy committee to, let them know our feelings on the criteria. Yes. Can, we can send informational that we're looking on a suitable time frame to revise the criteria, and between now and next month's meeting, work that out. Have the resolution next month. That will give respondent, staff, and everyone a chance to kind of dial it in.
The question I have, and I'm throwing this out here, just let's throw something. Why not? If resources have to be allocated within the UPWP, and if the UPWP for 2018 had to be adjusted to accommodate time during this calendar year, that sort of change recommendation would have to be done at the policy committee level, correct?
Yes.
So the question, well, no, I'm throwing this out here, because the question comes down to, I mean, if this is our recommendation, and if this is going to require modifications in the UPWP, whether it's this year or reallocating, looking at what next year's is gonna look like, and making sure that there's money in that UPWP, maybe it is between this month and next month, we get a better idea of what that is, because that is something for the policy committee, honestly, to mull over, to decide where they want to allocate those resources. And if that is something the policy committee feels is appropriate, and that's where they want to allocate the money, I mean, we can look at making that recommendation to the policy committee for them to make that change. Yeah, I guess, wait a minute, has something to match.
I mean, by the time that process plays out, and if we were to get the policy committee to redirect, and us to redirect resources for the FY, for calendar year F18, that wouldn't see the light of day until 20 March, April. Yes. At which point, almost third of the year is already.
Yeah, but we're sitting here talking about these changes, moving things back 2 months, so 2 months is 2 months. You're still that much closer in moving this forward, and like I said, my issue has been that every time we say we're gonna deal with this sooner rather than later, 4 years later, 4 years goes a lot faster than you think. And before we know it, it's gonna be here again if we don't start moving these things forward. So, I mean, I guess I'm looking at it, if this is really, if this is as big as we want it, as we're saying that it is, then you have to make it a priority. It's where you put your allocation to your priority. And if we're gonna prioritize it, then you have to actually put the associated funding and people and staffing with it. So, I mean, that is the kind of the question before us, is if this is a priority, then we have to make those changes.
It's going to be a stupid question. I'm going to ask it anyway. Does this have to come from staff to be before us?
Does that have to come from staff?
Yeah.
Someone has to build it.
Well, for a case of beer, I can find a teenager to crowdsource this and then put something before us that we at least have a tree to hang ornaments on, is what I'm asking. I think we're all frustrated with what we have. I think we all recognize it needs to change. We're frustrated we don't have the resources to do it, but I think we're trying to constrain ourselves by assuming that we are the only ones that can. And so what I'm saying is, for relatively little effort, and frankly, I think there's probably enough people that are concerned about this, if we throw a website with little more than a doodle poll up there and start getting input and start at least rethinking this. I'm not saying it would be something that we would go with, but
Because we still have to.
we still have to go through the whole process and the public process, and I get all that. But
Compared to our comp plan.
I'm just sensitive to how much staff has on their plate And frankly, I think the timing is right. And I don't want to miss an opportunity and wind up resource loading a schedule that means we aren't going to look at it for 3.5 years.
So I'm gonna ask a question, I guess, in the committee, this has been a lot of discussion, we do have a motion, we've at least, I guess we've addressed the action item that is before us. Do we want to have another work session to kind of flesh this out and decide what our recommendations are and how we want to move forward with this? And I know, trying to get everybody in the room at the same time, we have 24 minutes left in this meeting, you know, as far as, do we think we're gonna have numbers, do you think we're gonna have, I mean, or like, as Ms. Walsh was saying, you know, bringing this forth next month to continue this discussion. I'm just putting it out here.
Well, I think there's need.
Yes.
So, want to? I can certainly say probably no.
No.
Want?
Yeah.
That's different than need to.
Did we vote on the second motion?
There wasn't a
There wasn't.
second.
So we need to make a second motion, and we need, whether or not the resource discussion is part of the second motion, or that's the third motion. I just think in tight times, it's constrained staff, time and budget. I still think that's an important aspect forward. To say, look, we're asking to change the ship. We need a little bit of money to do that in the time frame that, so we can be most effective. So I think maybe that's another motion, and if we could vote on that. You're not.
I'm not exactly sure what you're saying.
He wants more research.
Making a motion.
I want more resources for the
policy
team to
committee
accomplish
to
an
make
important task.
modifications to the UPWP to allocate resources to start working on the TIP criteria now. Correct?
Correct.
Someone want to make that motion? Can we make that motion? We already have a motion on this one action item.
I think you have to wait.
You gotta
I
do
don't
something
know that
with
we
the other
can
one.
have a second motion on the same action item.
That's why I was asking.
Yes. Yeah. So that motion is done. So
Vote on the
now-
first one.
What?
But you gotta vote on the first.
We already voted.
On the second.
She said no
There was no
objection.
second.
No objection. Oh, okay.
Okay.
So she did that.
So
Yes.
make a motion. I would,
No, we can't.
That Bull's got a motion.
It is done.
Yes.
No, wasn't a motion. It wasn't a second motion. You can only have one motion on it. It was a resolution, it was discussion, it wasn't.
gotcha.
That's why this would have to be brought up next month as an action item. Correct?
Later this year.
That's why she asked if anybody else had any amendments. No, that's not why I'm chair. I still get lost.
Because it's in the opposite.
I still get lost. You do know how I became the chair, right? I got hired, all right? We've been doing that. So now that we recognize we're gonna have to, if we want to move forward with an actual motion of making that recommendation to making changes to the UPWP policy committee, the question comes down is, do we need to have a work session to discuss what that motion looks like and what we wanted to encapsulate? Because you could have a resolution in front of us next month, sort of thing. Or do you want to, or Mr. Hassan, would you like to draft a resolution for distribution amongst us?
I'm not sure what that means. Because when you ask for a modification for the UPWP, are you de-obligating certain funds from existing projects to be able to, okay.
Yeah, so
That's what it
right
would
now,
be.
we have a UPWP that shows all the tasks that we're gonna do. Here are the things that we're gonna do, and then also has staff time. So what we would need to do is say, well, we already are planning on doing a new tip, and it's gonna take X amount of time, and here's how much money it's gonna take. We are updating our MTP, it's gonna take this much time, and here are the staff that are to it. So now we're gonna have to say, not necessarily more funds, but how are we gonna shift the existing staff time to take them away from the things that they're doing or we're planning on doing in 2018 and move them to a revamp of the tip criteria and a new tip, which will be adopted sometime in, assuming 2019, just due to the normal amount of time it takes to do tips. So.
Because that collectively affects a lot of people, I would recommend that we have a work session to be able to vet that out. Because I can come up with a recommendation for what needs to be de-obligated, and you all may not agree, so.
Yeah, no, I think
guess there is a question between want and need. I think the need is there, so really, I'd say look for a time.
And I hate to sort of bring this about, but does it make more sense to take a look at our calendars now and book something? Or, because I find that whenever those emails go out, life happens and we don't necessarily sort of correspond to the responses, and I'm sort of guilty of that, of course. Since we're all here.
Well, we can have it anytime between, well, we'd have to, probably the sooner the better. What'd you say?
Wednesday is usually not a good day for me. Let's do the 24th. 24th then.
So you want to hear?
Actually, 23rd.
Depends on
Can you
the
eat?
time. The 23rd, that would be after 10:30. 1:30, not in the morning? No. You said in the morning, and I said no. You have to be in the afternoon.
I'm available. Yeah, the question comes down to,
Here in February.
Thought we were talking about.
No.
no, we're talking about
She said
before.
soon.
Soon,
I
we're
am
talking
so
about
on
before
either
next
day.
month.
Okay, yeah.
So am I hearing the 23rd, 24th, and I can send out a poll and find out, just lock those 2 days?
24th is not good for me.
23rd.
23rd
Looks
afternoon.
like the 23rd, looking at that. Yes.
Yeah, it seems like we can all do 23rd afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right now. John, is the 23rd assembly night?
Yes.
Just finish before 5.
Finish before that.
5.
Have to, you know, if we could do it at like 2 o'clock to 3, it'd be great.
Well, it's gonna be more than an hour.
Well,
All right.
not even go to 4. But that's
So are we saying right now, we're saying Tuesday, January 23rd from 2 to 4?
You're,
Yeah.
that's a late morning for you.
You didn't hear me. So I said, not the morning.
Yeah, I will have to find a room. Let me know what we find.
I don't have any meetings booked in any of those rooms at this time. You just have to, yeah, I can't put it down here, but, yeah. Okay. The question I have is this, so it's gonna be all work session? Well, special, no, I mean, when I say all, I mean Bike Ped Committee, Citizens Advisory Committee, Freight Committee, Policy Committee, AMATS Committee. We all have stakes in, so when I say all committee, I mean, we're looking at what time works for us, so then I wonder, should we, yeah.
Which one do you want to have? A lot? Get them all.
We're, it'll be noticed, right?
And just so I'm clear, so the purpose of this meeting would be to evaluate the current UPW team and see if what the cost benefit of adding this additional piece to it. In other words, what gives, right?
Yes.
That's good. That's, okay.
I guess technically, well, I don't know if it needs to be all committee, but I mean, we can extend the advisory.
So if it's,
But
there's kind of two parts, health suggesting we add resources, and I don't know what the possibilities for adding resources are. And maybe that's part of the discussion also.
I've had it as part of the discussion.
Yeah.
I think it's part of the discussion.
If we can just add bodies and add staff, well, that's great. That's an easy solution.
I didn't just send a citizens advisory committee to the brewery for an evening and tell them.
Second
Well,
motion.
time there are TAC work sessions or joint work sessions. We have had CAC invited before.
I'd say it needs to be, I don't know if it needs, I'd say TAC, but the question is whether or not we want policy committee involved, because really this is something that's gonna be coming to them and they're gonna have to make recommendations on.
Well, we'll invite them and we'll tell them it's, kind of an opportunity to
Yeah.
hear it early.
Because we're gonna be discussing funding, which is, honestly, we can make all the recommendations we want, but if the policy committee doesn't wanna do anything with it, then. So, TAC would be, so. Okay. That was technically still a discussion on the action item, even though we had a motion. That was our only action. I thought we did that. How was it?
We don't have responsibility.
Oh, okay. All right, so that brings us to actually, we're on item number 7, which is committee comments. Are there any committee comments for the good of the order? Mr. Hanson?
Just let everybody know, February 8th, which is at the same time as our next meeting, there is the transportation fair at the UAA Sports Arena. It goes from 3 to 7, so there is a little bit of overlap, but it's the same thing that DOT and we have done in the past, have various projects throughout the municipality there with representatives from all the agencies to answer questions, whatever on the project. So please feel free to attend. It's free. Yes, it turns out it starts at 3 and ends at 7, so there's a little bit of free time here.
I just need trying the public to come here and there and.
I understand. I don't think the time was set based on our schedule, so.
I know,
Not.
exactly.
Our schedule was set years in advance. But do they care?
Okay, so transportation fair. Any other committee comments?
Just a complete reminder that October 24th, the Port of Anchorage changed to Port of Alaska. So if we can update that in the future. People are waiting. October 24th, the Assembly made an ordinance change to change the name to Port of Alaska. And the reason for that is to emphasize the importance of a port that is located in Anchorage for the entire state of Alaska. Port formerly known as the Port of
All right, I noticed the change. I knew it was meeting without being told. I was like, oh, that's really good. Marketing, PR, got it. I will say my excuse is that was the assembly meeting right after I got back from vacation, so I actually didn't go to that one. All right, any other committee comments? Mr. Rizzo?
Public transportation. So our electric bus safely came through the Port of Alaska on the 31st, and we'll be putting it into service on December the 15th. There is a final tour if anybody's interested tomorrow at 1 p.m. You just have to show up at the transit building, and I don't think it'll be maximum capacity, but it'll give you a good feel for what electric bus feels like and how it sort of operates in sort of the Alaskan environment. So you're all invited.
Have you driven it?
I have.
How was it?
Good.
Yeah. Okay.
License for
I
that.
think we have a new step date coming out. That's a public relations.
I don't have a date, but we do have, our work has to be completed and turned into headquarters by next Friday. So anticipated release of the draft 1820 STIP should be in of January.
We also have a new Anchorage International Airport Director, and I can't pronounce his last name yet, so I'm working on that. I'll get back to you.
It's worse than yours? No, fine. I have to remind myself.
Whole bunch of consonants all in a row. This is Nick Rixick or something.
Nice.
Got him out of Chicago, so John Parrott's replacement.
Okay. Good information.
Yeah. I think it was in the paper and I couldn't pronounce it.
All right.
I couldn't.
This is related to kind of what he said. I had a moment at the gym this morning on the TV. I was working out, and they had a Y20K announced, like they were projecting looking forward at Y20K. And I had that moment, I was like, I'm remembering Y2K, and now we're at Y20K. And it feels like it was yesterday. I'm like, when I say 4 years goes by fast. Y20K. 2018, folks, time flies when we're having fun, so. All right, are there any public comments for the good of the order before we end?
Sorry, to go hand in hand with this TIP release, DOT Central Region and Anchorage Field Office worked on submitting a request into our headquarters to increase the AMATS allocation. So the CMAC amount that you guys are receiving is expected to go up about $1 million, and then a small increase each year to kind of keep up with inflation and needs. And your guys' regular allocation is going to go up about $5 million, and then it's going to go up about $700,000 each year, each subsequent year for the foreseeable future. So we worked really hard on that to emphasize the needs that are here in Anchorage. They need a little bit more money. So that's kind of also something else to think about for the TIP that's on the hook is an additional money. So your guys' allocation will go up to almost $29 million. And then you add in the CMAX, so it's about almost $31 million.
Yay! Awesome.
Yep.
Mr. Weber?
Just very brief, thank everyone again for the time you put on this. I know it was abrupt, and I appreciate it. And it actually does prove to me once again that things go a lot faster if you're just not in agreement with everything I say, but.
I've said the same thing to my husband many times, and it still hasn't worked well. It just told him why it was easier.
Memory blank.
He's still flexible. Any other public comments? All right, if not, we are adjourning.
Oh, yeah, public process.